From brutal murders to high-profile kidnappings, here are some of the most terrifying secrets of Pablo Escobar.
Pablo se gastó mucho dinero en la guerra.
The DAS building bombing. On December 8, 1989, a truck bomb exploded at the Administrative Department of Security headquarters located in Bogota, Colombia, leading to over 57 deaths and injuring 2,248 people. This massive operation was said to have been ordered by Escobar himself, and it remains one of the deadliest attacks by the Medellin cartel during the war against the government. For the most part of 1989, Escobar had ordered a series of attacks targeting Colombian politicians, officials, and countless journalists. These times were so brutal because practically no one was safe from the terror of this drug lord. Several prominent people lost their lives during this period, including 12 judicial officials who stubbornly refused to do Escobar's bidding and sought to extradite him to the United States. This car bomb attack was the climax, and it was indeed a proper punctuation to the wave of violence. According to officials, over 500 kilograms of dynamite was used in the DAS building attack, resulting in the destruction of 14 city blocks and over 300 commercial properties. By the time the dust settled, there was chaos and mayhem everywhere, and not surprisingly, everyone wanted Escobar's head on a plate after this. Luckily though, the main target of the attack, DAS Director Miguel Maza Marquez, escaped the attack unharmed. From this moment onward, Escobar began to lose his god status, and the public appeal that made him unstoppable began to wane with each passing day. Escobar and his illicit romantic appetite. When Escobar wasn't busy counting his millions or ordering hits on his adversaries, Don Pablo would spend his time vetting smoking hot reporters like Virginia Vallejo or countless surgically enhanced sex workers flown in from Brazil. But beyond this, his appetite for women was even more disturbing. One part of Escobar's story most people don't know about was how he wasn't so allured by more experienced women. The drug lord preferred teenagers who had little to no experience and would often seek out underage virgins to satisfy his deranged cravings. Sometimes Escobar would throw wild parties where he would select the best of these little girls, and their fate afterwards would sometimes remain shrouded in mysteries. But for many of these girls, meeting Escobar was the end of the line, as the drug lord sometimes had all the girls murdered after having his way with them. There was one such party in the late 1980s that ended with officers discovering the mutilated bodies of up to 49 teenage girls, although Escobar was never tried for these crimes against humanity. While the media often shies away from reporting this aspect of his story, cases like these go on to accentuate Escobar's legacy as one of history's greatest villains. Escobar once brutally murdered his two most loyal employees. Although the media sometimes portrays Pablo Escobar as a non-violent drug lord, the reality is very different. Those who knew Don Pablo personally knew he was a man prone to violence. He gave no room for any form of betrayal or compromise in his business dealings, and would deal heavily with anyone he found stealing his money one way or the other. These were the circumstances that led to the death of two of Escobar's most loyal men, Gerardo Moncada and Fernando Galeano, an event that eventually led Escobar down the path that ended his life. You see, after Escobar agreed to surrender to the Colombian authorities, based on the agreement that he would be incarcerated in his own facility, which he built and protected himself, the drug lord put Moncada and Galeano in charge of things while he wasn't around. But he was heavy-handed on them, and the two were kept on a very tight leash. From his highly luxurious cell, Escobar would monitor the duo's every move, ensuring that no one was leeching off of him in any way or form. The two were also required to pay a hefty war tax of $1 million every single month, further straining their relationship. One day, Judy Moncada, Gerardo Moncada's wife, accidentally revealed to Escobar that her husband and his associate were dissatisfied with the heavy tax they had to pay. This angered Escobar, and he quickly summoned the two to La Cathedral, his private prison. Once they were there, Don Pablo began laying accusations on the two, claiming that they were stealing from him. This was due to the discovery of stacks of cash hidden at Moncada's farm in Rio Negro. Before you could say Jack Robinson, Escobar had murdered Galeano using a pool stick. He then proceeded to order Moncada beaten to death and then dismembered, and then his limbs were thrown into an oven and burnt to ashes. This event sent shockwaves through the Medellin cartel, but it was the international outrage that eventually led to the end of Escobar's reign. After news of the execution made international headlines, the world erupted in outrage against the Colombian drug lord. Many began calling on the Colombian government, questioning the sheer audacity that it took for Escobar to commit such a gruesome act on prison grounds. What followed was a storm of events that eventually led Don Pablo to flee from La Cathedral. And the rest, they say, is history. Kidnapping prominent people. What better way to make an important statement as a drug lord than to kidnap anyone who wasn't willing to bow to your supremacy? Pablo Escobar understood the power he held, and he used it without hesitation. Although Don Pablo wasn't essentially the one snatching people off the streets, he was the one calling the shots. During his reign of terror, no one was safe, as the drug lord was capable of kidnapping anyone he wanted to. This included the son of the Colombian president's advisor. This particular case was supposed to serve as a deterring statement to the president that his recent crackdown on narcotics was beginning to piss off some really important people. But when this kidnapping wasn't taken too seriously, Escobar launched a large-scale kidnapping operation that saw dozens of people being forcefully taken from their homes and held hostage for extended periods. This included the kidnapping of journalists, prominent politicians, and even children of several prominent people in the Colombian government and rival cartels. Escobar's underage bride. Earlier in the video, we talked about Pablo Escobar's unbridled appetite for underage women and his many escapades with these young bloods. But Pablo's most open secret was his marriage to 15-year-old Maria Victoria Henao in 1976. But that's not where their story started. Escobar had met the beautiful Maria when she was just 12 years old, and the two became romantically involved. Despite being sexually abused by the drug lord, the future Miss Escobar fell head over heels in love with the El Patron. And even though Escobar also forced her into a back alley abortion when she got pregnant at the age of 14, the mother of two remained loyal to the drug kingpin.
Soy una mujer comprometida con mi vida, con la de mis hijos. Soy fui la esposa de Pablo Escobar.
Enduring years of affairs that went right under her nose. While the media may portray Miss Escobar as a mature, grown woman, the truth is that when she first fell into the arms of Pablo Escobar, she was but a sweet little child who couldn't have imagined her life taking such a drastic turn. Escobar used a prominent hitman. In case you've never met a real-life assassin, here's one for you. Meet John Jairo Velázquez Vázquez, also known as Popeye or JJ. Popeye was under the employ of Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel for a very long time, until he surrendered to the Colombian government in 1992. Before he left the cartel, Popeye was a lieutenant who commanded half of the sicarios. He was one of the foremost hitmen used by the Medellin cartel to carry out some of their most high-profile hits. In his own words, Popeye admitted to 257 killings, and many more atrocities he committed under the service of Don Pablo. He was one of Pablo's most trusted men, and he was extremely useful for the cartel. Popeye was even responsible for one of the cartel's most highly publicized kidnappings, which involved the candidate for mayor of Bogota, Andrés Pastrana Andrago, who eventually became the president of Colombia. He also saw to the kidnapping of another Colombian politician, Francisco Santos, who would later become the nation's vice president. Then there's the case of kidnapping and murdering Carlos Mero Hoyos, another prominent politician, as well as the killing of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán Sarmiento. But that's not all. Popeye was also the man in charge of the commercial plane bombing that caused the death of 110 people. We'll get into that in a minute. After surrendering to the government, Velázquez was sentenced to serve time for his acts of terrorism, drug trafficking, extortion, conspiracy for terrorist purposes, and murder. The judge sent him to spend the next 30 years of his life in prison. But after spending just 23 years and 3 months, he was released on August 26, 2014. But that would not be the end of Popeye's story. In 2018, he was subsequently returned to prison on charges of extortion, and on February 6, 2020, he finally succumbed to the cold grips of a terminal esophageal cancer. And that was how the tale of one of the most cold-blooded killers the world has ever seen finally came to a close. The strange stash in Escobar's private prison. In 1991, Pablo Escobar agreed to surrender to the Colombian authorities as long as he would be incarcerated in his own prison, just so he wouldn't be extradited to the United States. The government agreed, and the drug kingpin commenced the construction of one of the most luxurious prisons you've ever seen before, known as La Cathedral. But after murdering some of his own henchmen right on prison grounds, the police, working hand in hand with the DEA, decided they had had enough and subsequently launched a raid on the facility. By the time they got there, though, Escobar had escaped through a carefully concealed exit built under the prison. But when officers searched the place, what they found will shock you. According to DEA agents Steve Murphy and Javier F. Peña, who were very instrumental in tracking Escobar down, Escobar's office, situated in the prison, was filled with some of the wildest things you would definitely never expect. The officers found stacks of vibrators and other adult toys neatly arranged in a closet. There was also a stash of women's lingerie carefully arranged in the same closet, although no one has been able to figure out whether these were new or if they belonged to some woman whose fate remains unknown. Escobar was notorious for his wild parties, which he would throw right in his palatial prison, attracting several sex workers, and according to reports, not all of them made it out of there alive. Pablo Escobar gave his hitmen bonuses for murdering cops. As a drug lord, Escobar understood that the more unstable the Colombian government and people were, the easier it would be to do his kind of business. In order to achieve this perfect climate for his business ventures, Don Pablo declared war against the Colombian police. As a means of getting rid of as many police officers as possible, he began offering his hitmen a bonus of $650 for every police officer they murdered. Seeing that Escobar took this incentive very seriously, the hitmen took this business to the streets, slaying the officers in dozens. The situation got so bad that by 1993, over 550 officers had lost their lives in the pursuit of these bounties. It was a really scary time in Colombia, and nobody was safe in the streets, not even the police. One high-profile death was that of Jamie Ramirez Gomez, the head of Colombia's narcotics unit. The officer was shot while he was driving with his family just a day before he was supposed to appear in court to testify against Pablo Escobar. Escobar's hitmen were working overtime to take out as many officers as possible. One of the most prolific henchmen, Popeye, we talked about him earlier in the video. He was said to have taken almost 300 lives and arranged the murders of over 3,000 individuals while at the employ of the drug kingpin. These stories remind us of the terrifying realities of living in Escobar's Colombia, and they cast a heavy shadow on the rather romanticized images often portrayed of the drug lord. But as terrifying as this particular case is, this next one kicks things up a notch. Escobar's role in the Palace of Justice siege. November 6th and November 7th, 1985 will remain forever etched in Colombian history as two of the bloodiest days in recent memory. On November 6, 1985, the terrorist guerrilla group M19 took over the Palace of Justice in Bogota and held the Supreme Court hostage, while they intended to hold a trial against President Belisario Bentancur. The attack came just days before the Supreme Court was scheduled to rule on the extradition policy that would see several drug lords, including the likes of Pablo Escobar, being transported to the United States to pay for their crimes. Although the Medellin cartel did not in any way participate in the attack, Escobar was said to have given the group $1 million for the attacks, so it's safe to say he was in the control seat of the operation. By the time the military was able to take control of things, everything was upside down. The assailants took 300 people hostage, including 24 justices and 20 other judges. But within just 3 hours after the initial seizure, the army was able to rescue 200 hostages from the lower 3 floors. while the surviving hostages and the gunmen occupied the top 2 floors. At the end of the day, the assailants burned down tons of criminal records of some of the most infamous criminals in Colombia at the time, further weakening the justice system in its endeavor for proper justice. The event caused a monumental shift in the political landscape of the country and eventually played a huge role in bringing Escobar's reign of terror to an end. Escobar's loot was never fully recovered. Back in 2015, a Colombian farmer was working in his field when he struck something quite unfamiliar. The 65-year-old had just acquired a $3,000 grant from the government to start a palm tree farm, not knowing that his life was about to take a very shocking turn. As he worked on the farm, he accidentally stumbled upon one of the innumerable money pits where Pablo Escobar's loot is still being stashed. And you won't believe how much he found buried in his farmland. A staggering $600 million. Yes, you heard that right. This man just casually stumbled on a lifetime fortune. This was just a few of Don Escobar's cash, which are stashed literally everywhere you could imagine. You see, at the peak of his criminal career, Escobar was raking in as much as $5 million every single day. Now, if you're a business that makes that much illegal cash, how else would you keep it safe? For Escobar, burying the cash in several strategic spots was the answer. But the money came fast, and the drug lord eventually forgot the location of many of his stashes. Today, many enthusiasts continue to pore over locations in Colombia, with the hope of stumbling on the hidden stashes of Pablo Escobar. It's like a modern-day treasure hunt. The big question, was Escobar killed or did he take his own life?
Que era el hijo más humano que hubo, el hombre que quería que Colombia estuviera en paz, pero no lo dejaron.
Doña Minda, ¿se le van a entregar a usted el cuerpo de él o se lo van a entregar a otra persona o quién se encarga?
Creo que la primera persona que debe de resolver es la señora.
¿La esposa viene para acá? ¿Usted se ha comunicado con ella?
In the final 24 hours of the King of Cocaine, Escobar made a death-defying call to his son Sebastian. A call that ultimately allowed the authorities to pinpoint his location. The forces after him were so hell-bent on taking him down that Escobar was still on the phone when he realized that the house was surrounded. As the assailants drove deeper into the building where Escobar's aunt had kept him hidden for some days, the drug lord knew that this was his final stand, and it seemed he was prepared to go down on his own terms. Although the Colombian authorities continue to stand by the claim that the final bullet that ended the life of Pablo Escobar was delivered by the hands of one of their agents, this claim has been contested by Escobar's son and, quite frankly, his entire family. You see, according to Sebastian, before his death, Escobar had indoctrinated him to believe that extradition was a fate worse than death, and because he wanted his family to avoid torture, he taught young Sebastian how to take his own life if they were ever captured. His directive was to shoot into the right ear. According to other members of his family who were close to him, during the last moments of his life, Escobar would daily reiterate that if he was ever cornered and he knew he wouldn't get out alive, he would shoot himself through the right ear instead of allowing the authorities to take him into custody and parade him for their own glory. When Escobar's body was recovered, guess where the fatal shot was? That's right, the right ear. Quite convenient, right? Even as the authorities continue to stand by their version of the story, Escobar's family maintained that the Escobar they knew would never allow himself to be taken down by his enemies. But, to be honest, we'll probably never know what the real truth is. Which of these stories was the most terrifying for you? Let us know in the comments section down below.